Welcome to the Voodoo Power Podcast.
Welcome to Plates and Pancakes. We're sitting down today with Adam Feit. Dr. Feit is Assistant Professor of Exercise Science at Springfield College. He brings over 15 years of coaching and consulting experience with a multitude of youth, collegiate, Olympic, and professional athletic teams, including the Buffalo Bills, Calgary Flames, Brooklyn Nets, and the USA Olympic team. Feit also has served as a collegiate and professional strength and conditioning coach, along with nutrition coordinator for the NFL's Carolina Panthers, Eastern Michigan University, the University of Louisville, and the Citadel. Prior to returning to Springfield College, Coach Feit worked as the head strength and sports psychology coach for Precision Nutrition, the largest nutrition coaching certification and software company in the world. Dr. Feit has his PhD in sports and exercise psychology. He is certified by the NSCA, holding a CSCS D, RSCC, SCCC, and PN2. Dr. Feit has a Bachelor of Science in Applied Exercise Science from Springfield College, a Master of Science in Exercise Science and Health Promotion from California University of Pennsylvania, and a Doctor of Philosophy in Physical Education from Springfield College. He is the co-author of Coach's Guide to Jump Training and Complete Guide to Training the Female Athlete. Coach Feit's research and interests include the use of mental skills in strength and conditioning, coaching efficacy, and education, along with youth, physical, and mental performance. So welcome to the show, Coach.
I appreciate you having me, Coach. Really looking forward to the opportunity to chat it out, plates, pancakes, and everything in between.
Well, that was quite the bio. It's very impressive, all the work you've put in to make it to where you are now.
Well, I appreciate that. And like many of us, I think we never settle and we don't become complacent. So whether that's a new job, that's a new opportunity, or simply maybe a combination of both, I've been very lucky and fortunate to have great people around me, in front of me, and behind me to make that happen. So hopefully going to lay low for a little bit and make the biggest impact I can at Springfield College, my local community. So hopefully be able to do this again.
Well, I'd ran into you and I didn't have a chance to talk to you after, but you presented it down in Texas for the SCCA. And Villani's Villani, and he presented in a total different way, and it was an awesome presentation. But yours, as far as commanding the stage and presenting some wonderful information, really captivated me, maybe the most. So I appreciate all the time you took to put on that presentation, and it was a very eye-opening experience to hear some of the things you had to talk about.
Well, thanks for sitting in. I know you always had your choices at big events like that, and shout out to the SCA board for putting together such a great lineup, like Villani and everybody else included. So, but I'm going to throw this back at you. Maybe we'll get into it. What was so captivating, or the different lens I may have taken other than, how to get a kid's 40 down or how to improve their vertical jump by a few inches?
Well, I think we talk about that stuff so much. I think between coaches, we're texting or we're emailing or we're posting videos or we're listening to podcasts that talk about that stuff. So it's very much in the forefront and very easily accessible. You got into more of the mental side, which has kind of made me curious as I've gotten older to what makes a good coach-athlete relationship. And I talked about it on plenty of these podcasts, but when I got into this, I was not prepared for the mental load that the athletes would bring with them. So I'm wading through this, trying to help somebody reach their goals and dreams, and maybe I don't have the tools in my toolbox to efficiently do that. Listening to you talk, it's like, okay, there are people out there that are helping guys like me that can tap into what that athlete's feeling and then hopefully get them through that so they can reach their full potential.
Yeah, I appreciate you really displaying it like that, because whether it's an additional tool in the toolbox, whether it's stubbing out a tool that you once had or a tool that you had used. And I talk about this with a lot of coaches. I used to coach this certain way for so many years, and then I got a new position or I got a new job or I worked with a different type of sport. And it forced us to really reorient ourselves into how we approach the session, our conversations with our athletes. And even now, me being a father and somebody in our community talking with the parents. And so as we kind of blend all those elements together, right, I always say, and again, I could be chastised for this and never invited to a conference again, but I think getting kids faster, stronger, more injury resilient and robust, I think those are the easiest parts of our job. And, you write a great program, you write an okay program. You don't even write a decent program, but you coach it with passion and purpose. Kids are going to get better. And I think it's connecting the dots in those other areas. And like I talked about in my presentation, the 6 inches between the ears, I think are really the most, if not one of the most important aspects to coach.
And there's so much to it, and it's very much like an onion. And about the time you get through one layer, another layer presents itself. So now it's a whole new challenge to figure out how to overcome the new obstacles.
Yeah, and I think that's a great analogy, Coach, because I don't know if I get myself in hot water, but having a background in coaching and then going back to school for psychology, and it can be a very gray area, right? We can automatically hear something and we might be triggered to think that I can't handle this, that I need to go refer them away to a school counselor or a psychologist. And I almost try to tell coaches, almost everybody I work with, like, hit the pause button yourself. Like, don't hit the freak out button. Don't hit the easy button from Staples, like the old commercial of like, you know what, I can't handle this. You should probably go talk to somebody else. And I think with the education that we receive, with our own certifications and certificate programs, and as well as the collective experiences that we bring as coaches, we do have a lot of the resources to help these individuals at any level. And I think when we dismiss that notion, when an athlete finally opens up to us or shares us with some information, we have a pretty good checklist of kind of what I can do, what I should do, and most likely what I'm going to do. And so that's just a challenge for all the coaches out there. When you get some information, trust in your own education experience. You can do a lot more help than harm. I can guarantee it.
What you said there, not referring them to somebody else. They came to us, air quotes, for a reason. Mm-hmm. So sometimes that makes it a little harder to pawn it off on somebody else because they trusted us to kind of lay out their problems or lay out what's ahead of them. So I don't know if that maybe breaks a little bit of trust if you just send them to somebody else, but it sure doesn't help it, I wouldn't imagine.
Yeah. And I think, everything always comes down to relationships, right? We talk about that in all of our programs and our presentations. It's a core value of mine and my facility and how we run our family. We call it the R factor, so it's relationships over results. The results will take care of themselves, but you can't get that unless you have that numerator of relationships. But I think, like you said, I'm reminded of a quote that Dave Tate said many, many years ago at Elite FTS was, when we as professionals get asked the question that might be a silly question, it might be a stupid question, it could be at a family barbecue, it could be at the grocery store, and somebody in our family community circle asks us a question about training, we might be feeling like, I really don't want to talk about this right now, right? You're at a wedding. Oh, what do you do? Like, I remember going to a wedding this summer and somebody was like, oh, what do you do? And I was like, oh, I coach, because I tell him about psychology and that usually shuts the conversation down. And then instantly starts telling me about his workout program. And I'm like, all right, let's do it. But I think about what Dave said is that when these people do reach out to you or they do ask a question, like, it's an honor. And we shouldn't dismiss it. We shouldn't just send them to Google. We shouldn't just walk them down to the counselor's office. There is a reason why they reach out to us. There's a reason why they opened up to us. And so as that onion of vulnerability starts to peel itself, and we're very careful to ask the right questions and be very conscious of, if I ask this question, am I going to be ready for what could come from this, right? And that comes again with more continuing education. But on the same notion, or on the other side of the coin, if we're going to ask athletes how they're doing, we better make the time to actually listen. And I think we see that all too often at conferences. I see it in the hallways on campus as well. Hey, how's everything going? And then what do you do when they say something you weren't prepared for? Are you going to drop everything in that moment? Are you going to follow up with them? And so I think that's a crucial skill of communication that we have to embrace. But let's not shy away from those crucial conversations. Let's open up a dialogue, because it's going to open up some really deep insight that's going to make our coaching effectiveness way more efficient and effective.
And there's so much to that. The whole thing is I didn't even realize this stuff existed until I got lucky and we had a softball camp, and Christy Ambrosi came down. She played at UCLA. She played on the Olympic team. They won a gold medal in Sydney. And she started talking to the young girls on our team about all the resources that are available for playing at a high level and letting mistakes go and the different things like that. So then now it started me down a rabbit hole of investing in this material. Now, it took a long time before I think I was able to apply it, because I had to get myself out of the mix and realize
Sure.
I wasn't the center of it, and actually the athlete was. But through that, it's definitely opened up my mind. And then being able to talk to somebody like you it definitely makes it all come full circle.
Yeah. And you bring up another great point there in terms of, do we really understand it? Is it something so mysterious, or is it kind of, a placebo effect, right? Well, like I joke often that, if you want an easy degree, get a degree in psychology because everything's based in theory, right? Like theories are just our best explanations of trying to understand human behavior, right? And in the context of psychology, I don't know why they're not motivated, or I don't know why they're not confident, but I have a theory, right? I think of that family member that tells you at the holiday, like, well, I've got a theory about what's going to happen this year. And all we can do is collect as much evidence as possible in their actions and their thoughts and their feelings and help them paint a picture of the current situation. We can't force anything down their minds or their throats about, well, this could happen, or have you ever thought about what might happen? It's really all about the reality, but helping them see what's happening from a different lens. Because again, like they say, I think the tongue is the strongest muscle in the body, allegedly, depending on what type of strength coach you have and what body part split you work with. But if we're unable to truly train how those thoughts are coming into our minds and what those thoughts trigger in terms of feelings and what they ultimately cause us to act, we're really missing out on a big piece or a big part of that system to help us be more dominant, be more confident, and have the ultimate most success. So again, just another plug for get your eyes and ears out of the podcasts and books of another cycling scheme or periodization method, or again, all great things. I've gone through that and I still go through it. I teach strength conditioning at the college level. So I need to stay sharp on that to see what my kids are learning. But it's really opening up the other dimension of improving performance from that mental side is super, super crucial.
You were kind of talking about getting your head out of the book in the podcast on the strength conditioning side, which I had listened to you talk on an NSCA conference as I was preparing for this, and you talked about the books you recommend that your interns read, and a lot of those were leadership and different books that weren't strength and conditioning related because they're getting enough of that, so that would expand their horizon and kind of start finding out what's out there. Is that something you still kind of stick to pretty hard?
Yeah, actually, I'm reading one right now called 10 to 25, and it is blowing my mind with how do we, quote unquote, motivate people in that age range. And I have a whole diatribe about motivation and the role of a strength conditioning coach. And I talked a little bit about that at the conference. But this idea of whether you're working with young kids or preparing them in middle school or high school, now they go away to be adults, then they become young professionals. It covers, again, based in science, based in collective lived experiences, pulling in resources from all over the dimensions of the world about how do we reach these individuals. We can blame it on generation gaps. We can blame it on the classic, well, when I was your age, or quote unquote kids these days. But when we do dive into the science of what we once thought how kids responded, science changes, and that's okay. And I'm all about that. So back to the original question. Yeah, I'm still reading the blogs. I'm still catching up on things like Simply Faster. I follow all the right people on Instagram, and but most of all, I check in with my students. Like, where are you getting your information? Because this is the information I'm going to either have to debunk or essentially validate. Of like, yeah, these are really great options, but again, we're not yet ready for that type of stuff. But when I can squeeze in some leisure reading, if it doesn't involve like a Jack Reacher thriller, then yeah, I'm diving into how do I understand people better? How do I navigate conversations? That could be power dynamics, that could be negotiation strategies, because at the end of the day, and something I'm really proud about what we're doing and building at Springfield College is that notion of preparing and building the next generation of coaches. You can write a program, you can put together an Excel spreadsheet. Everything now is sports science. So what does your dashboard look like? Can you work with GPS? What are your vault systems? Whatever. All that's fine and dandy. But you can put together this wonderful spreadsheet with all the standard deviations and Z-scores. What is your coach going to do with that information? How can you communicate that? And when they aren't necessarily bought in, or they cancel a lift session for the third time in a row, how do you navigate those thoughts, and how do you maintain rapport and continue to stay a part of that culture, which is so important?
Talking about this, do you teach your interns how to auto-regulate their reading so that they can read books on multiple topics at one time and not necessarily get lost?
That's a great way of framing it. So yes and no. What I've learned over the years as a, hitting my 40s is that just like teaching, we tend to make recommendations based off our own preference, right? I may want to teach others how I like to be taught. I may recommend strategies. Going back to what you said earlier, right? It's not about us. And it's a challenge for us, right? We feel that we help our athletes, to help our colleagues about, well, let me tell you about what worked for me. And that's actually like one of the biggest dangerous things we can do because, and I'm often reminded of Andrea Hootie at University of Connecticut. Her and I spoke at a clinic at NSCA, Vermont, New Hampshire with Scott Caulfield, and shout out to everybody up there. But we talk about like the golden rule, right? Like treat others how you want to be treated. And Hootie's up there and she's like, it's not the golden rule, it's the platinum rule. Treat others how they want to be treated. So back to the recommendation, I love to diversify, right? Little concurrent sequencing, kind of do a little bit of this, do a little bit of that, because I tend to chase the shiny ball. Like I get bored very quickly. And if I find a book or a topic that I'm not really into, I kind of just like forget about it. So I remember being a young coach, 22 years old at the University of Louisville back in like 2008. And I would have this spreadsheet with my wife now, Mary Kate at the time. And we would have like a complete grid of like 5 different areas of professional development. Like, what am I doing this week for nutrition? What am I doing this week for mobility, stability, flexibility? What am I doing this week for periodization? What am I doing this week for leadership, et cetera? And it worked really, really well for me, but that's not going to work well for everybody. And so I go back to the differences between undergraduate and graduate. Undergraduate, it is really like let's just throw a bunch of spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. You got to take some classes here. You got to take some classes here. You got to read about this. You got to interact like that. And then once you start to specialize, hopefully when you get to graduate school, a big chunk of that is going to be the thing that you love most. And so depending on the athlete I'm working with, depending on the intern that I'm working with, really kind of doing our own needs analysis, right? That was my first assignment. It's actually due tonight in a couple hours. So hopefully I wake up and everybody got it done. But before I can start making those recommendations, I actually have them do an internal audit before we even start our internship. And I ask them, what are your biggest gaps? Where are you the strongest? Where are some things that you could use a little WD-40 on and, get those bars to spin a little bit faster, or, what surface rust needs to be scrubbed off? But I used to have this amazing curriculum and I realized, well, not everybody's going to respond to the same thing. This doesn't have to be like class where I need to have a 16-week syllabus, concrete form, right? So going back, and a common theme you're noticing here, Coach, is you ask me a question and then I go off in like 5 different directions, but it always loops around, is I'm going to ask them what works best for them. And it's really shaped how I teach. It's shaped how I coach. And yeah, I'm going to have my staples. I'm going to have some rigidity to my plan. But if they need help in understanding human behavior or just social skills in itself, we're going to focus a lot on that. But at the end of the day, and this comes from my wife's research when she did her paper, was if you're an intern, the number one thing I need to make sure that we develop right away is your value, the value to the program that you're in, the value to us, and the value that you're going to feel. Because if you just keep showing up and you clean, you mop, you set up the weight room, you break down the weight room, you give a couple coaching cues, maybe a spot, that's great, but that's not going to keep you coming back day after day. So where can we add the most value to you as an individual, but where can you add the most value to our program and our institution?
And as far as how you were answering them, that's great. You take all the time you need and you go and make a big as circle as you want. I'll take notes and try to keep up. If we can stay away from my notes, you're going to establish a way better podcast because it's the things that you're thinking about. So as far as that goes, that's awesome. The intern thing, providing value. Yes, that's good for everybody. And sometimes people don't know where they fit in or what they bring to the table. So the quicker you can establish that, the faster everything's going to progress in the right direction.
Yeah. And, we run, and I see it from different lenses, right? I've been a college coach for a number of years. I had a short stint in the pros, and now I run my own facility. And so now my interns really for the large part are current students or former students where I can kind of see them interact in the classroom. I know if they're strong academically, but at the end of the day, we're working with kids, 8 to 18 plus, right? And that's adults included. And so I want to be able to look at that. And, I am a little biased towards, I'm not going to teach you all the X's and O's. I'm not going to teach you exactly why I'm writing this program because we're going to cover that in class. So whether I had you last semester or I'm going to have you next semester, if I teach you all this stuff now, it's going to help you a little bit, but you've got to be able to be confident. You got to be competent in our exercise instruction. And at the end of the day, I want you to replace me. And I believe in one of the first foremost principles of leadership is replaceable leadership. And that's something that was taught to me at an early age. But at the end of the day, if I'm not there, if I'm not running the ship, will the ship stay afloat? Will it keep on keeping on? And if I don't take the time to develop those skills, whether it's at the gym, whether it's I've got interns in the grad program now running, the warm up for the first time with men's lacrosse or women's lacrosse, and you got 40, 50 people. You got football, which is 100 deep, all different various levels of skills. And I spent a lot of time on things like coaching organization and projection and positioning. You could say all that in speed work, right? I'm going over linear speed this week. So what is your projection? What is your position? Right? How do you organize your session? Short to long, long to short. But at the end of the day, it always comes back down to let's look at that development and let's fill in the gaps as needed and become solutions oriented and focused, right? They already know what they're not good at. And I've learned along the way, and this is kind of what stemmed my research into confidence, was this idea of, well, let's just throw them in, right? I talked a little bit about in my presentation about, baptism by fire. 100%, I think we've done it. It's happened to us. Let's just throw them in the deep end and see what happens. Well, you go back to school and you learn that, some kids will respond and some kids won't. And some kids really will just completely just stop trying. And then they sink to the bottom. And then, as you know, if you've ever had a kid that was so exhausted, growing up, or you have to carry them back, it's dead weight. It's hard to bring them back to where they were. And so that's completely changed my approach. I still love baptism by fire, but now I'm able to auto regulate that flame. How hot is it? How big is it? How long am I going to keep them in the heat? And if I notice a little distress after knowing them, am I going to step in and kind of help them out a little bit? Am I going to pull back? Or do they need to go through a situation where it is going to cause a little discomfort? Because I'm a big believer in that, where I want you to lean into that and then come back and we're going to talk about it in debrief so you're better prepared. But again, all that, it's levels within levels of their own coaching development.
And some of what you're hitting on now is what I took from my notes on your presentation in Texas. And you had hit on some of these things that it really resonated with me because I hadn't thought about that. I've heard people talk about it, but to actually apply it is difficult. So what you hit on there is you can't be afraid to turn up the temperature, but you do have to know how hot it's getting.
I mean, look at how we cook. One of the silver linings of, the pandemic many years ago now was I got to watch a ton of MasterChef Junior. I mean, I've never seen Gordon Ramsay as much as I did. And I came away crafting a really good hand-seared steak. And my kids are, steak snobs now. And they, I don't have the whole Blackstone yet, working on that. But, if I'm going to do it, I'm not just putting it on the grill. I'm going to take my time with it. But if I don't know how hot it is, how long do I sear it for, right? If I'm not watching it and it starts smoking and the smoke detector goes off, right? It's oof, right? So I can't just, again, throw them into the deep end and see what's happening. I can't just forget about how hot and how long it's on the burner. And if it needs to go down to another burner, guess what? I can do that within the session. So I might start, I think I talked about this a little bit, but these levels of delegation. I'm not going to take an intern and throw them right into, all right, you set the tone for the day, talk about the objectives, lead the warm up, go right into their big multi-joint, explosive, three-dimensional ground-based exercises, right? Check off their last sets, huddle everybody up. You might be the plank coach. You might be the hamstring or glute ham raise coach, whatever it is. And I'm going to slowly start to microdose that responsibility and delegate, whether that's maybe you're just demonstrating, and then maybe you are instructing that exercise. Then we progressively overload that into a block. Then we progressively overlap into a more important block or, more dangerous exercises, so to speak. And then we're going to get to that point. And so I look back on everybody that I've worked with until then, and I've apologized to them. I see them at conferences that I'm like, wow, my bad. I'm so sorry because I did what was done to me and a lot of great things. I had a lot of great mentors along the way, but I also know we did a lot of stupid things and we did them because that's what, everything got passed down. And so if we're going to break any type of development down, whether it's in the weight room, whether it's in movement development or just education, the fundamental law of progressive overload doesn't change. But yet when you look at creating and developing young coaches, we often forget about that. And so I think it's a challenge for all of us to go back to our own books of how does one get stronger? How does one become more resilient? How does one find the ability to tolerate stress more effectively at a longer period of time? So whether it's add an extra 5 minutes on your cardio, is it add an extra 2 shuttles to your conditioning? Is it add an extra 5 pounds to the bar? Eventually, you get to a point where you have to add a little more, and then you got to evaluate them and know, all right, maybe we'll scale it back a little bit. Give you a little bit of a reload here. It's the same thing with developing coaches.
There is a point that it gets very Henry Rollins-ish. You have to
Mm-hmm.
explore discomfort. I know
Mm-hmm.
when he talks about it, it's a little bit different going outside in the winter without a coat and different things
Yeah,
like that. But
the
it's all
paint cave, right?
right. It's all the same premise, right? Don't get them in too far, but let them explore a little bit of discomfort and figure out how to manage that.
Yeah, 100%. And I think for all the people that are dual coaches, right? They're sport coaches and strength coaches, and I see this. I watch my wife coach. She coaches our daughter's 10U soccer team, club team, and they're fantastic. But I watch my son's team, and he's 12, and he's on an elite level travel club team. I forget all the terms, but they're good, and we pay a lot of money for him to play each year. So sorry, Mary Kate, if you're listening eventually, but I watch how like they interact, and I see when they keep messing up, right? Or do you let them like self-organize? Here's a great example, right? Like in the weight room itself. You go over it, you're very clear with your coaching cues, you're really clear with your instruction. If you provide too much structure, if you provide too much direction, they become dependent on you. It's just like parenting. And again, I'm oversimplifying parenting because it's a lot harder than that. I can assure everybody that's listening. But if we don't step back and do as our parents said, right? You go to the park and you figure it out. What type of game are we going to play? We limit their ability to develop those connections. The neuroplasticity levels go down, right? Tell me what to do. That's exactly how I'll do it. And I can tell you from my classrooms, it's the same exact thing. I work with students from all disciplines. I have students that want to go into physical therapy at one point, PAs. Most of my students are applied exercise science, so they want to do something in the exercise science field. And I've got some students that are in the athletic training and sports medicine field. And regardless of the type of individual you are, we have different preferences of learning. They're not learning styles. Research has debunked that, right? So you can't say I'm a visual learner. You can't say I'm an auditory. You just prefer that. But I've had assignments where they were kind of open-ended. Even my needs analysis right now, right? I put in a little section like athlete profile, and I give them some probing questions, and they're like, "Well, what do I put here?" I'm like, "This is where you get to choose your own adventure. Like, do you want to work with a high school age? Do you want to work with professional? Do you want to work with a middle schooler? What's your training age? Well, I don't know what it is. Well, come up with one, right? If I don't have it in rubric form, some students, they freak out. And then they feel like I'm grading them unfairly, and they didn't know, they weren't clear on the assignment. And I always go back to like, you're not going to have the step-by-step guided instruction during the session, right? You're not going to remember what was on page 489 of your essentials textbook. And in a case of an emergency, and I'll give you one, this happened this summer. I've been CPR AED certified for like 20 years. Never had to use it, thank God. I'm in the library this summer just I had an issue with my laptop, went to the tech desk, and then I heard this, wow, somebody fell to the ground. I looked behind me, and there's a woman just seizing up. Okay. I didn't have time to go back to like, what was the acronym here? I had to make a mental shortcut and saying, okay, the number one thing is to make sure that this person is safe. And I had to call help and designate somebody. Anyway, where I'm getting to there is that you have to give them some freedom, and you have to let them explore. And if we don't, when we're no longer there, and I'll say it in my coaching sessions, my kids know it, what are you going to do when I'm not there? I'm not going to be there on the sideline. I'm not going to be there in the headset. I'm not going to be there to tell you how much. So back to the point of auto regulation, I want to teach them that. And that's a hard skill. So for all the coaches out there doing like RPEs and RIR, man, I think that's harder than percentage-based training. I think it's way harder than VBT, because guess what? If you throw a Tendo or a Gym Aware or a Perch or anything else on a bar and you tell them that's too heavy, they're not going to know it's too heavy until the number tells them it is. How do you guide somebody where you're saying, hey, you should have about 2 reps left in the tank, right? So an RIR of 2 or an RPE of 8, whatever it is. How do we get them there and then say, you know what? I actually think you had 4. Really? Well, how do you know? Well, then you open up that conversation and that dialogue. And so just again, another challenge out though, like, yeah, we can say we're doing all these types of methods, but like, do they truly understand what they have inside of them? And how do you help them uncover that? I think that's the beauty of coaching in itself, especially at a younger age.
Man, you're covering just some unbelievable topics. But to delve into this a little further, the need for autonomy and how that affects the way the athlete perceives what they're doing. If you're a coach, and I've struggled with this, riding horses, and I've struggled with this coaching, letting the animal or the team do what needs to be done, let them do their part of the job so I can do my part of the job. That's very difficult to just turn that out there and let it happen. But if we don't, the athletes will never learn to put it all together for themselves.
Yeah. And I don't have any horse riding experience. I think the closest of horse riding I got is me watching 5 seasons of Yellowstone. So I know breaking in a horse, so to speak, is quite laborious, and you have to essentially, carry a big stick and let them know. And correct me if I'm wrong, Coach. We don't have a lot of that up here in Massachusetts, but like you got to set the tone and let them know, like, hey, I'm running the show here. That works. It works for athletes, but not all the time, and not all the athletes. And I think as they get older, if we fail to give them that autonomy, if we fail to respect one of their basic psychological needs, I think it is kind of like a shot. It's a shot to their ego. It's a shot to our belief in them. It's a shot to really their inner value of like, so you don't trust me. And I'm dealing with this with parenting, from cell phone usage with our oldest to going to our big, record breaking festival that we just, finished up this past week about, exploring and, taking care of yourself and taking care of others. But you hit the nail on the head. And, along with autonomy, you have competence, and then, you have relatedness. And so I think when we're looking at these aspects of these basic psychological needs, it's that quest for, let me do it myself, or let me try to figure it out myself, or let me offer an opinion. Because at the end of the day, nobody knows the athlete better than the athlete. Nobody knows the coach better than the coach. And when you get somebody in your ear, whether it's nagging them all the time or constantly telling them what they have to do and how they have to do it, when they don't have that around, they struggle. And I see this, not to skip ahead or to anything, but I see this with athletes that transition when they're done playing sport. And I brought that up, and it's something that I want to make more time for, and unfortunately my schedule doesn't allow for it. But we as athletes, we as coaches, we live by the itinerary. We love being told when to eat the breakfast, when to go to lift, when to go to practice, when to go to meetings. It helps create structure in our day. And so I see the transition in two parts of lives. I see the transition when my first years come to college, when they aren't in school from 7:30 to 2:30. So they went from no autonomy, right? Got to take the bus, got to get dropped off, got to go to homeroom, got to go all this stuff, to now they can go to class if they want, and they can go to class if they don't want to, whatever the case may be. And then we see it on the tail end of, for 4+ years, we've got some 5th and 6th year guys on our teams because of, the pandemic and whatnot, and coming back from grad school. What do you do when it's done? Like, for 4 to 6 years, you have lived your life. Or if you're a coach, and man, I got some great mentors in the field that, they haven't coached in a little bit, but they coached their whole entire life. One of them says, you become almost institutionalized, right? I think of like Shawshank Redemption, right? When Red gets out, I'm dating myself a little bit now. I don't know if many viewers are going to remember that movie, but you get out and you're almost like fighting to get back in, right? You'll take any coaching job, you'll take any athlete, because that's the life, and you don't want to know any other life. And so again, another challenge, I'm challenging all the coaches that are still listening to this, is how are you helping these kids when there is no more team, when it's just them, when they have to figure out how to write their own workout program? Did you do everything for them, or did you teach them along the way? So then they come back to you and they can safely lose body fat, or they can put on some muscle now that they're not super stressed from 30+ hours of activity a week. That's a big change. And I see it from the physical lens, and I see it from the psychological lens. Transitions are tough. And so if we don't build in those pieces of autonomy along the way, somebody's going to hurt, and you either hurt now or you're going to hurt now and later. I think the choice is theirs.
We're way off script for my notes, and this is great. I hate using my notes if I don't have to. So the stuff you're laying down, is amazing. I will go back and answer the question you kind of posed on horses.
Okay.
It's not about the stick. It's a mind you're working with, and they have all the needs that an athlete needs. They have the pyramid of, safety and food and all
Maslow's
those
hierarchy,
things.
right?
Yeah, Maslow's
Right.
hierarchy. Where what works with horses works a lot with athletes too. It's not about the pressure you're putting on, it's when the pressure's released. And through the release of pressure, the horse can find the avenue to stay between your legs, to stay between the reins, to stay straight. When you look to the left, he should look to the left. When you pick up a canter and you're making a big left circle, them ears should turn to the left. He's going where you're going. But you shouldn't have to make him stay with you. You should find a way to want him to stay with you, kind of like the athlete. So that'll take
Appreciate
care of that.
clarifying that. Yeah.
Well, that's how I view it. Now, there's other people out there that would definitely say a bigger stick, and that's fine. There's plenty of ways to skin a cat. But working with the Cowboys, I was fortunate enough to work with. That's how they looked at it. Was it is a mind. It is find the enjoyment in the horse being the horse. Find the enjoyment in the athlete being the athlete. So that jumped into another one, and that was probably one of my first questions out of the gate, and we've been just hitting on some major stuff, but it's almost a pandemic is what you've said and stuff I've read is the athlete identity crisis about what happens when the sport's done. What happens to a football player his senior year when he plays his last game and he knows there is no more, or a volleyball girl when she has her last set? Where do they go? What do they do? And who are they now? So as coaches, you brought up an interesting point. What do we do for them? Where do we go to find that information? Where do we go to get better at helping them through that?
Well, I will, a shout out to, the association that I'm now certified with. So I'm a certified mental performance consultant, which is essentially like the CSCS of sports psych. And our governing body is the Association of Applied Sports Psychology. And a lot of institutions, especially at the Power Four level, not necessarily the professional level, but even them, with the Players Association at the various different levels of sport, they have, this development piece. They have these departments of mental health and performance. For us at Springfield College, we have, Department of Sport and Exercise Psychology. We've also got athletic counseling. And so there's a lot of places that are doing a really good job with this. And I think if we look, just like anything else, right? Like parents do this all the time. Well, I saw this, the Cowboys were doing this on third down. Why don't we put this in our program? And it's like, all right, well, not exactly that, right? But what are the best of the best doing? And if we're watching the Olympics in Paris, right? There was so much talk about sports psychology and mental performance. Like I was eating it up, right? Because we say it all the time, right? If you want to go fast, go by yourself. If you want to go far, you go with a team. And if we look above to those bigger institutions, whether they're supported monetarily through money, they're supported through resources in their community, at the end of the day, we want them to be contributing members of society. And from a business standpoint, hey, if I'm an athletic director, I'm thinking, man, they gave it their all, right? Blood, sweat, and tears for 4 years wearing the jersey. And I want them to donate back to the program, right? At the end of the day. But like ADs, what are we doing to help them? Because they might be the next booster president, right? They might be the next big business person to donate a lot of money to get that new weight room. And so I say, go to organizations like that, see what you can see at those levels. And like anything, right? One of the keystone lessons I get from everywhere, and I tell my kids, is like absorb, modify, and apply. And I tried to get into that a little bit at NatCon, and I realized that like we needed to dig some holes and move some dirt first, and that's why I'm like really excited for the pre-con this year to really dive into that more. But this can be anything from group chats to, I wish we had the time at our institution. We don't, because our weight room's an academic classroom, but like get an alum lifting group together, right? Get some event, whether it's a Tough Mudder or a 5K or some sort of, body transformation challenge. Like we're professionals. Like let's do this. At the end of the day, they have given so much of their time, their body, and the injuries that they've sustained. Maybe they've helped us win a couple championships along the way. So for me, and like I was that coach, and I'm cognizant of like the coach I was, because when you lose that last game this season and you're in that locker room, it's the same speech. right? Well, they were better than us. We weren't as prepared, et cetera, et cetera. Meet with your coaches. I'll see you at the banquet. We're back on the road recruiting and so forth. And then right away, they're on to the next team, right? And we've said it, right? It's the last time this team will be together again. But when did we meet with them? When did we offboard them, so to speak? If we spend so much time onboarding our athletes, and I'm speaking mostly from the college level because I've been around it quite a bit in academia and then as a coach, but the letters and the motivational quotes and make sure you get your paperwork done, and then the 2 weeks of preseason, right? The shared struggles. Why don't we do a true off season where we're done? We spent 2 weeks getting you ready for the season. Now let's take 2 weeks to get to offload the season. And I think you need to start earlier. I think we need to have better conversation. I think sport coaches need to, back to your analogy with the horses, you need to let off the reins a little bit, right? I should be able to talk with my seniors early in the season about thinking about the next step. It's not going to distract them, right? Just like talking, and I'm our mental health faculty rep at Springfield. Talking to kids about suicide's not going to increase the incidence of them doing it. Like, we know that's false. So talking to kids about hey, the season's going to end in 3 to 4 months. It's not going to distract them. We need to start planting those seeds. And so I think you bring in those resources. It's a counseling center. It's a career center. It's maybe a graduate assistant strength and conditioning coach or one of your interns to help put together a performance program. And with the resources we have now with online program builders like Team Builder or Volt or Bridge, whatever the case may be, it's there. And I think, like anything, I tell my students, do it once, do it right, so you don't have to do it again. Don't slap something together and just to check a box and saying, yeah, we run a transitional program, we do a couple workshops and we did our job. Well, you can do your job or you can get the job done. And so make mindful time, build it into your program planning. Okay, thanks. Season got done a little bit earlier than we were hoping. Here's what's next. And for all of you that have given us your all, you're not done yet. This is the least I can do to help you navigate to the next step of life. So they're not going to be in those team meetings. They're not going to be able to go to the team lifts, or maybe they are, right? Depending on what type of coach you are and the space that you have. But don't we think we owe them a little bit more than a handshake at the end of the year banquet and a picture and putting their name up on the wall for hitting a 4-digit total? I think so. So another challenge, coaches. How are we preparing our athletes for when it's all done?
And you put this on top of the expectation that they are supposed to have it all figured out, that 14 to 22 years old, 24 years old, they're supposed to know what they want to do with the rest of their life. And it's supposed to be all just step after step after step. I hit this mark and then I go to this mark and then now I'm here and I have the big house and the big car. That's just not how life works out, but we expect it's not worked out like that for any of us, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. Yet here we are pounding this into a 14-year-old's head that, hey, you need to know what you want to do. I'm 44. I have no clue what I want to do.
Yeah.
So
I was 32 and I went back to school, I tried being the old guy and everybody's calling you dad and saying no to social events because you got to go pick up the kids at soccer practice, whatever it is, right? We've all got different back to periodization. Everything's nonlinear. We talk about, it's just progressive overload, just go heavier, just do one more rep. That's not how life works. So we can have a plan, but embrace the chaos, right? Embrace the fact that it's going to go up, it's going to go down, and hopefully we have more ups and downs. But at the end of the day, we've got to be able to tie that all in together and help them realize that. And then be kind, be empathic. I love, the best majors, I love work. I taught the intro to exercise science class last year. And I made it my mission in the second semester. It was all transfers or it was all undecideds or kids that just wanted to take an elective, right? And I go, look, I'm going to convert. I did the, the KPIs. I'm like, I got to go. I'm going to convert 32% of you. You are going to love this so much that you're going to be like, I want a career in this. And guess what? They're 19 years old. I got kids that are 20 years old in their junior year, finally getting slapped in the face and realizing, I don't know if this is what I want to do. I said, no, it is. You're just finally accepting the reality that you just can't show up in a cutoff and work out. There's some professionalism here. And I'm not going to let you do that because I just looked at your degree audit and you're 75% of the way through. So we're going to lean into that discomfort, but I'm not going to let you back out now. So a 14-year-old, what you want to do with your life, I would have never found out what I want to do with my life unless I snapped my left arm right in half a week before my first senior football game, captain the football team, we talked about it, right? So what's a 17, 18-year-old's ball is life, right? So you remove their identity as a insert type of sport athlete here, they're crushed. And if it wasn't for me breaking that arm, I would have never talked with my athletic trainer. I would have never found Springfield College, met my wife, built my career, and had my family. So those things happen. And I think we have to ease off the gas a little bit and give them time to explore and give them options. Bring in, as a coach, bring in people, right? That one of the best things and best moments I've ever had in my coaching career is I've had younger athletes train them for years, middle school, high school. They make their final college commitment. And one of them in particular, I'll never forget, his name is Kyle, says, I want to go to Springfield College and I want to do what you do. Like flat out, you changed my life and I want to be exactly who you are. And I mean, like, how do you not show emotion to a moment like that when you had such an impact just coaching weights and plates, right? Plates and pancakes, squats and sprints. You made such a big enough impact that they're going to change their whole trajectory of life based off what you were able to do with them. That's what it's about.
Learning to be the person that you needed when you were a kid, possibly in a lot of instances, because they're in the same boat. Even though they may have great family lives,
Sure.
that doesn't mean that they don't need a little bit more somewhere along the way.
Yeah. And none of us are self-made. And I talk about it with my students and I talk about it with my athletes. And I've had great coaches along the way, particularly at Springfield College. They talk about, giving thanks and writing a letter. And I build that in our internship program, right? I now supervise all of our strength conditioning kids. And one of their weekly assignments when they're grinding, I've got students doing 650-hour internships at Power 4 schools. Hey, you're going to write a handwritten letter to somebody that helped make this happen. And that could be a parent, that could be a professor, that could be your sister, that could be anybody in your life that helped you get to this point. And I think we need to remember that and bring in those people because the more connections we have early on, the more moldable they are, and the better chances that they're going to make a better decision. So they don't waste, right, mom and dad's tuition money. They don't waste a couple years in a career sitting in a cubicle, hating life. And that's what's really, really important.
On top of all this, athletics have become way more of a mainstay than they ever have in the past. Right now, you know, where they play, who they play for, what position they play has all taken on a higher priority in culture alone. So the pressures of the modern athlete to win, to fit in, and these are all things that I've heard you talk about. So be heard, lead, be a role model, be a servant leader. All of these get heaped on them on top of what we've just talked about. So navigating some of that, how has that changed over the years? How we look at that?
Well, I think it opens up a conversation. So two things that come to mind immediately. I remember seeing just recently, I think it was a video of Tom Brady talking about how these programs aren't programs anymore, right? You go to a big institution, you go to a big school, the pressure to play earlier and make that impact sooner is paramount. And kids don't develop, right? And so, Tom starts telling the story about, seventh string on the depth chart, developing, working, understanding the system, finally becoming the starter, then still gets drafted late and does the same thing. And so I think when we look at that notion, it is that idea of are we truly building coaches or building athletes or and I saw it when, I was in Division 1 in 2010 and I worked with a coach that was just signing junior college transfers because there was a pressure to win. I see it in the coaching level too. I can't even imagine for any of the college coaches on right now what the portal's doing for you. I worked my first summer of college baseball, a shade below the Cape Cod Baseball League this summer, and the amount of discussions we had about signing and money and going here. I was working with a soon-to-be senior. He was on a different team every year because of the portal. So I think that's like a real hard issue to look at. And then back to this pressure, this idea that is it self-imposed or is it coming from the people that say they just want what's best for us? And I think this goes down to long-term athletic development. I think this comes down to are we playing to win? Are we playing to compete? Are we playing to learn? And if you've been playing a long time, it should be a very gradual progression. My coaching, I was just actually just talking about this with my wife last night. Our son was playing under the lights at a local high school, and she was actually subbing in. The head coach was gone. So it was her and another coach. And all I kept hearing was right idea. That's the right idea. And I go back and we were talking driving on the way home. I said, you know what? I've never heard that more than I have this year. Coaches celebrating mistakes because they're learning. They're 12 years old. They're trying to see the field. It's the first time they're playing on an 11v11. The field's bigger. There's more players, and they're making mistakes, but they're thinking the way they should. So maybe they don't kick the ball as far as they should have, but the coaches are out there saying, "Right idea. That's the right idea." So it encourages them again. And then when I look at that piece, about the whole, playing to lead or playing to win or playing to compete, remember a challenge for all the parents. Like, how do you reflect on your own kids' performance? How do we feel? And coach, I'll throw this one right at you. Imagine how I would have felt if I got off the stage. I knew I ran a little late. I was fired up, right? I was like, we got to get some energy going here. I already feel bad that I set back the last speaker about 15 minutes because I got set back by 15 minutes. Imagine if you or anybody else from the association came over to me and just started ripping me for all the things I did wrong. Started just getting into me about all the things I should have done. But yet we do that to our kids. We do that to the kids that come off the sidelines. We don't even give them a chance to breathe and decompress and let them reflect on their own. And if there's like any lesson that I've learned along the years and what I've read and as I've gotten better as a sporting parent, right? I'm the guy that stands in the top, doesn't say anything, or I stand in the corner because, all the other people are yelling and screaming. But I make it almost a priority. Like when my kids come, I loved watching you play today. I just love seeing you get after it and challenge yourself. And I'll give them time to say, well, how do you think you did? And if they're willing to talk about it, great. And then if I feel I need to I'd like to offer some instruction or just some reflection. I say, hey, I noticed some things. Do you mind if I kind of throw them your way for consideration? And sometimes my son's like, not right now, Dad. I'm like, okay. And then if you never ask me for that, that's fine. But I'm never making it about, here's what I saw. Because at the end of the day, I'm not out there. And we go back to like the lenses that we look through. We have, I pulled this from, I think, Coach Cav years ago about, we have the self view. And I even just think about refs. Like I'm watching some of my athletes and now they're refereeing and they're just getting ripped. And I'm like, oh man, I'm going to go out there and say something. Like, you don't talk to my athletes like that. Like these kids are trying to earn a buck. But you have the self view, right? What can I see in my own two eyes in front of me? I'm not going to see everything. And then, of course, I'm going to see something better from the second view of the sideline. Of course, that's why you're on the sideline. It's more panoramic. It's like the 0.5 setting on Instagram when kids are taking photos. And you know where you're going to see the most? You're going to see it from the third view of the skybox. And so I think we have to check ourselves as coaches, strength conditioning coaches, parents, educators, ADs, everything. It's real easy to offer your perspective, but ask yourself, but where did you see it from? What S view did you see it from? And that's gonna tell you a lot about what's happening with those athletes and how those emotions are coming into play.
You hit on some really cool stuff there. We'll kind of take it part by part, but I was fortunate enough to coach with my brother, and he's younger than me. But I learned more from him than I think probably any other coach I ever coached with, just from his experiences. And he hit on what you said there. Instead of just getting right up into an athlete's stuff and what were you thinking and what were you doing, have a normal conversation. Like he said, the majority of the time they'll give you a legit explanation of why they did what they did. In their mind at that time, at that instance, that was the best thing they could have done. Now, was it? Maybe not. But you can coach that at such a lower tone at that point. And now you're an actual team as opposed to an authority figure yelling at a subordinate. That helped me tremendously. It took me a while to gravitate towards that, but the conversations turned out to be a lot better than the other way around because you could find common ground and you could build on that.
Well, and it's a mutual respect for each other, right? And if you've been around the game like football as much as I have, right? They throw that interception. There's not one quarterback out there that purposely meant to throw it, right? Like no athlete is ever going to come off the sidelines and coach is ripping them. You know what, coach? That's what I plan on doing. That was my goal. My goal was to throw into the other guy's hands and get a pick six, right? Like, so like, I don't know, Department of Obvious Research, like ask a better question, right? Like, and I got motivational interviewing. I'll throw this one out there. If coaches could read more about that and the impact that the types of questions we ask really open up incredible answers. It's not about asking more questions. It's about asking the right questions. So little things, instead of saying like, what were you thinking? Reframing it as, tell me what you saw out there. What were you trying to do? What was in your way? Or why do you think that happened? Instantly, it becomes back to your point about, respecting each other. It's mutual respect. I was trying to do this. I did not check this, or I didn't view that, or I didn't rate, whatever the case may be. And I've seen it with athletes too. I've seen it in the weight room where the kid catches a clean and is so excited that they caught it and they forget to let go of the bar, and then they start tilting back and they throw the bar, right? Like, for coaches that say if athletes get hurt in your weight room, it's 100% your fault. I say false. Like, they're kids and they're still trying to figure that out, right? Obviously, we want to minimize as much injury as possible, but in the moment, they've got an explanation. They've got a reason. We may not agree with it, but like anything else, let's make sure they don't do the same thing if that's not the thing we want them to do again.
If the overall goal is to get them to play as free as possible, you have to reduce the friction somewhere along the way. And the easiest part to reduce it maybe in the communication.
But yet, what are we doing now at a high level, right? We have headsets now being wired. I even saw it like in college baseball. They had a headset and they were telling the pitch counts, and I was grossly ignorant. I knew it wasn't just like, wrap your finger a certain way around the ball, throw whatever you wanted, and, look at the catcher's fingers. But I couldn't believe it. And I would talk with the pitchers and I'm like, don't you ever just want to go by feel? And, this is feeling really good, or that's, and yeah, then we kind of shake it off and they give us something else. But again, if we're always going to, it's just like teaching kids how to drive. I'm not ready for that yet. Still got about 4 years. But when I talk with parents in my community, like I run a dad's group in the morning, my wife runs a mom's group, and they're talking about all their kids getting their licenses. The backseat driver mentality, it will crush an athlete, not just the front end of your car when you're telling them that you're micromanaging every action. But yeah, that's what we do. We do it in the weight rooms. We do it when we're trying to establish every position possible. Let them get into a position and then ask them how that went. And that's the ticket. When they can give us the answer that we're looking for, that we know they're capable of giving, that's where the magic happens. And at the end of the day, you're creating more coaches. That's what I want. I'm working with kids. I've got high school baseball players right now, whether it's my college kids back on holiday break. My goal is to create more coaches. If I can coach you on the standards that I expect in my facility and the tempo that we work, guess what? Then you can start to pass that down and start coaching each other. So guess what? Coach Adam can't be on rack one all the time. Coach Adam's over here. This kid just started a couple weeks ago, right? Because he forgot about signups. So I'm going to get him right. But I trust you guys. You know what my squat depth standards are. You know that we should touch our chest on bench press, et cetera, et cetera. Are you creating more coaches in your weight rooms? Or are you just instructing everybody to do what you want them to do?
That brings up a whole new rabbit hole. So we all have mentors in our life or coaches that influenced us. So do you think that we emulate the coaches that had a big impact on us without really understanding the sense of what made them great to us? We're just able to pick out the obvious things we remember, but we don't really know what made them special. So we almost never make it to what made them great because we don't understand what made them great. We just know we felt good.
I think it's both. I think you speak to exactly the growth of how coaching happens. And this comes down to like our own confidence, right? Like we will coach a certain way because that's either how we were coached. So our own experiences. I did really well. I respond really well when I get called out in front of the team or when coach puts me on blast, right? Or we watch others, right? And this comes down to, what we call modeling or vicarious experiences, right? I think it's natural. This is something my wife and I talk about all the time. Her grad students coach a certain way. So when they come back for their second year grad school and there's 6 or 7 of them have their own teams, they coach very much like their last internship. So they're doing big time internships in the summer. They're doing 500, 600, 700 hours. They're cutting their teeth in the college setting, private sector, what have you. And they write their programs, how they saw their programs, even though we just taught them for a year. It's the availability bias. It's whatever they most recently remembered. And when our other instructors like Dr. Brian Thompson are talking about their coaching philosophies, it's hard to do that on your own until you see others. Like that's a thing that you have to you have to see what others have done, and you have to see how others have emulated that. And you got to go through the ick, you got to go through the mud, and you got to go through the, that pain cave of, having those challenging conversations with coaches before that starts to develop. So I think, to answer your question, it is both. The more reps you get, the more confidence you have to coach a certain way. And then, to your point, be able to sift through, were they really a great mentor? Or were they just that person in my stage of life? And I've had some incredible people come through my life, in my life, out of my life, back into my life. And naturally, whether it's a defense mechanism or anything else, I want to remember them for who they are and what they did during that point of my life. I'm not going to forget about all the other stuff, right? The chewing sessions, or when I don't feel real good. But generally speaking, um, we start to coach the way that made the most sense to us. And I have students that they go on bad internships. It's unfortunate, but sometimes it just doesn't click. It's a bad environment. Could be a bad supervisor. It's just they're not click. It's not the best for them. And we always tell them, hey, look, you're going to learn a lot of great things, and you're going to learn about a lot of great things that you're not going to want to do with your staff, how to treat people, how to write programs. All this is data, and it's your ability to take that data, turn it into information, and make it a practical application. So I think, to summarize all that, if it makes sense, it's this notion of like, you're going to do what you do because it was done to you, and that's how you saw it done. And as you grow and you become more wisdom and you gather more experiences, you start to formulate your own type of method and style. And remember the mentors for who they were and what they did for you, but you also don't forget what they didn't do for you. You're also not going to forget their shortcomings, but you become more mature. You're not going to hold it against them. And I think about the first year I was a head coach and all of the mistakes I made. And I think about that when I'm talking with some of our coaches that go on and get bigger jobs, or this first time leading a department. And I said, yeah, I've gone through that. I've gone through the imposter syndrome. I've gone through where I thought they were better at there, or that coach started doing a better job there. Um, and I think about the times that we had, and it was awesome. But I'm never going to forget the times that they weren't, because that makes me the man, the husband, and the father I am today.
I know it's a Sunday evening and you're probably wanting to hang out with your wife and get ready for the week ahead, but I'll hit you with a few more questions on some stuff that I think is really important and may get overlooked in some areas, and then I'll let you off here. But
I got 9% left. I just got the notification. So let's do it.
all right, perfect. Building a family through what you're trying to coach, where they want to wear your t-shirts, where you see them out in public and they have your t-shirts on, where they want to follow you on social media, where they feel like they're included and they see themselves in the big picture of what you're creating. One, how important is it to build that? And two, what are some steps that we can do to do that better?
Yeah, great question, Coach. Let's go back to the basic needs, right? Do athletes feel supported? Do we help them strive to become better versions of themselves? Are we emulating behaviors? And again, I'm working in the private sector when I'm not at the college. Are these areas and factors and principles that, again, I've got three walls and a giant net. When parents see that, are they proud to send their kids to us? Are we proud to send them there? And we use that to our advantage. We've got nothing to hide. We're going to hold your kids to a very high standard. We're going to give them high levels of support, and because of that, they're going to be highly successful. And so, how do we create that? It's being, as Brian Thompson and Mike Boyle said, be a certified nice person. Doesn't cost anything extra. But do I want to create a psychologically safe environment? I have coached in environments that weren't. I have contributed to those environments that weren't. And I look back on what I did and what I should have done. And at the end of the day, if I'm creating an environment where kids don't want to come, where kids don't want to actually push themselves to get better and better, I have failed them as a coach, as a mentor, and as a member of our society. So whatever gender you identify with, whatever sport that you play with, I want you to know that when you come here, these are our standards, but I will not go against your self-respect. I will not put you in a position where you feel less worthy of who you are now, but who I'm trying to help you become. And so how do you build that? You take through those steps. You audit your own coaching behaviors. And I think about one of the questions Joe Ehrman taught me years ago in his book, Inside Out Coaching, is what is it like to be coached by you? what does it truly feel like to be coached by you? And if you can pull yourself out of like this out of body experience and see what it's like, see how you're coaching, see how you're not coaching, see your body language, and that can give you some insight, that'll tell you everything about the type of brand you're trying to represent. And if those kids wear your t-shirt around town.
I just did an interview with Paul Collodi not very long ago, and he recommended Inside Out Coaching. I just bought it. I'm not very far into it, but it really makes you reflect on a lot of different things. Where are you coming from? Are you transactional? Or are you transformational? And how can you help the athlete more so than yourself?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, right? That's kind of why I left the pros. You know, there were some other reasons here and there, but I got to the level where it's just a business. All that came down to was winning. And if players weren't performing, they got cut. I would see kids come in, literally kids come in on a Tuesday off waivers, lift in the morning, practice in the afternoon, and then get cut again. And that was hard. I was 25 years old. That was a hard lesson for me to learn. Now I understand it. I get it. The high risk, high reward type situation. But at the end of the day, whether it's servant leadership, if it's transformational leadership, are we helping them close that gap between their current performance and their ultimate potential? And do you want to be an active role in that process? Some people don't. Some people chase the money. Some people chase the fame and the glory to run outside the tunnel, or they do what they need to do to get to the job that they really want. That's okay. But I always go back to the lessons of like making the big time where you are. You know, you are where you're supposed to be right now. What you do with that, that's to you.
Well, Coach, I could talk about this stuff for hours, but the time you've given me has been amazing. I can't wait till Memphis this year. You have the pre-con. I'm really excited about getting down there and seeing how you present on some of these ideas. So as far as tonight goes, thank you very much for your time and sitting down with me.
Well, I appreciate you and anybody that's still listening with us. And if you're watching us, it's getting a little hot in here. I'm sweating a little bit because I love what I do and I do what I love. So thank you, Coach, for giving me the opportunity for going to my session, because I knew you had choices of other activities that day. And I'm looking forward to connecting with everybody. So I'm an open book. I've got nothing to hide, only experiences to share. So whether that's on social media, that's my email, I'll give Coach my cell phone. Please reach out. We're only going to be able to elevate this profession if we continue to help each other. So let's continue to do that, because our athletes, our kids, that's what they deserve the most.
Well, I think that's a great thing to end on, Coach. Have a wonderful evening with your family, and we'll talk to you soon.
You too, Coach. Take care.